Chapter 27. A Battle. A Route. Ada and Arliss stood on the crater floor, blinking against the intensity of the morning sun. Above them, a huge column of smoke hung in the sky. The smell of fire and destruction was heavy in the air. In the distance, they could hear the thundering of horses' hooves, the clash of steel on steel, the shouts and groans of men doing battle. The boys picked their way to the crater's edge and peered out, taking care to avoid notice. But there was little need of that. The camp was deserted. The crater was the center of a circle of utter destruction. The Perthan supply depot had been in this vicinity. All their food, the fodder of their horses and mules, their arms and armor. Overturned wagons, many of them still burning, lay scattered about. The ground was littered with smoking bits of twisted plate armor and shattered spears and battle axes. "Where is everybody?" whispered Arliss. Aiden pointed toward the west. The Perthans were fleeing westward across the plain, toward Midden Marsh and their transport ships. The Cornwalder army was in hot pursuit, taking advantage of the chaos that followed the explosion in the Perthan camp. King Darrow had led a charge across the valley and put the invaders to flight. Now astride his foaming war horse, he thundered across the plain at the head of his army. This was the picture of King Darrow that Aiden carried in his heart. This was the Darrow whom Aiden had been taught to love and revere. The Cornwalders who followed him into battle remembered for the first time in a long time why this Darrow had been chosen to be their king, and they were ennobled by the very sight of him. Both boys wanted badly to catch up to their army, but neither was in any shape to run across the plain. Across the way, Aiden spotted a pack mule, still tethered to a hitching post. "Come on," he shouted to Arliss. The two boys clambered out of the crater and ran toward the skittish animal. They untied the lead rope, and both climbed onto the mule's bare back. In the far distance, the leading edge of the Perthan army was melting into the forest of the Ichihuli River bottom, which formed the western boundary of the Bonifay Plain. Ada and Arliss urged their mount onward, but the poor mule was a beast of burden, not a war horse, and they never managed to go on any faster than a trot. They were still a quarter league away when the last of the Perthan soldiers disappeared into the tangled forest. The Cornwalders didn't follow the invaders into the woods. King Darrow halted his fighting men on the verge of the forest when Ada and Arliss caught up. The king was arranging the soldiers into a long line. His answer to the Perthans' terrified, disorganized flight would be a disciplined, methodical sweep through the forest. But the army's reformation was interrupted by a distant eruption of wild animal calls from the depths of the forest. "Ha ha, haroof, woo! Ha ha, haroof, woo! Ha ha, haroof, woo! Ha ha, haroof, woo! Ha ha, wee! Ha ha, haroof, woo! Ha ha, haroof, woo! Ha wee! Ha wee!" These peculiar sounds were immediately followed by thousands of panicked screams. And then, to the Cornwalders' amazement, they were overrun by Perthans coming back out of the woods. The same soldiers who had run into the forest to escape the Cornwalders were now running headlong toward them. But this was a surrender, not a counterattack. Whatever was happening in the Ichihuli forest, the Perthans found it more terrifying than the battle on the plain. Their eyes were wild with panic, their faces ghostly white. They came out of the forest with their hands raised to show that they had thrown down their weapons. The Cornwalders could make little sense of the Perthans' garbled account of what happened in the forest. Some sort of mass hysteria had obviously befallen them, probably brought on by the shock of the flame powder explosion and the added stress of their flight across the plain. They babbled about lizard men and gray people and tree alligators that had attacked them from the treetops and from underwater when they reached the river in the middle of the forest. It was as if, in their hour of panic, Their minds reverted to the fairy tales and scary stories that old people and nursemaids tell about the Fiji folk. Aiden chuckled and spoke to himself. Our fight is their fight, and their fight is ourn. What's that? Asked Arliss, who still sat behind him on the mule. Oh, nothing, answered Aiden. I was just remembering something a friend told me.